What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by your favorite beat reporter, Chris Fedor. And Chris, you already got the Summer League shirt on. It seems like you're ready to roll, man.
Hey, man, what is it, about 2.5 weeks away? Something like that? Cavs going to have summer camp coming up this week. I don't know. I just found this in my closet. I haven't worn it in a long, long time, and it was cold as can be in Bay Village tonight. Every time I'm in Bay, it's like 10 degrees colder than anywhere else, like in this area, because we're so close to the lake. So I just tossed on a long sleeve, and I was outside playing and running and stuff like that. So I needed a dry fit.
I feel it. And obviously, Summer League is on its way, which means that the Cavs are officially making moves, as are the other teams around the NBA. The NBA draft has come and gone. We already talked about the Cavs selecting Jalen Tyson with the number 20 overall selection. And we also got to talk about the two guys that they have allowed and made a deal with to come and play on Summer League. So, Chris, we talked about one of them before, DJ Burns. He was a guy that we thought was actually a candidate for a position with the Cavs, potentially if they went and got a second-round pick, but also knowing that they worked him out earlier in the process before the draft. So, what are you hearing about that situation, about DJ Burns, and what he's going to bring to this Summer League squad for the Cavs?
Yeah, I mean, it's a summer league tryout for DJ Burns. That's what it comes down to. Don't know how much he's going to play, to be perfectly honest with you. There's going to be other guys from this Cavs roster that are going to get more of a priority opportunity. But he comes to summer league. He's in better shape than he was at the end of the college season. It gives him a platform to audition for the Cavs or other teams around the NBA. To see how he plays with this new body, to see how he adjusts to something closer to an NBA style. Obviously not the players that he would play against in the NBA, but when the Cavs brought him in for a workout, they liked what they saw. They were impressed with the way that he was able to move. They were impressed with how he's undergone a makeover and body transformation. And they like his personality. They like the kind of person that he is. And I think, give him an opportunity, see what happens at Summer League. If he impresses, maybe you have a deeper conversation about the possibility of a two-way. And if he doesn't impress, if he doesn't get a whole bunch of playing time, then no big deal. So it's just a Summer League tryout for a guy who is really, really notable given what he did during the March Madness tournament run. But he's going to have an uphill climb to make anybody's roster in the NBA.
And there are two other guys that the Cavs also added to their Summer League roster for this coming Summer League season, and that's Naquan Tomlin and Hunter Couture, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. Tomlin's from Memphis, and Hunter is from Virginia Tech. Those two guys are guys that are less familiar to people because they weren't having as big of an impact as DJ Burns was on the NCAA tournament scale. But, Chris, these guys are also coming on to the Summer League roster. What do you expect from these guys, or is it along the same lines as DJ Burns?
Yeah, I don't expect a whole lot. They just have to fill out a Summer League roster. They just have to have enough guys by the end of Summer League. Many of these guys are going to get an opportunity to play because some rookies get shut down, some veterans get shut down. So I don't make anything of these particular signings other than, like with DJ Burns, it's an opportunity, it's a platform, it's a chance to showcase themselves for not just the Cavs but other teams around the NBA. But like I said, the majority of the minutes are going to go to the guys that the Cavs have invested in over the last couple of years, including Luke Travers, who's coming from Australia to be a part of the team.
And talking about that situation, that also brings up Imani Bates, who the
Mhm.
Cavs offered a qualifying offer to this past week. He's one of two guys that got qualifying offers. The other was Isaac Okoro. We're going to get into that a little bit more. We talked about him at length on this podcast. But Chris, there was something that you mentioned that I want to talk about a little bit because I think it is very important when it comes to these draft signings, these off-season vibes, and all of those things because you mentioned personality. DJ Burns is a guy that has a lot of personality, showed that in NCAA tournament. And then also, Jalen Tyson is also a guy with a lot of personality, came into his press conference with a lot of confidence. And it really reminded me of kind of like a Keon Coleman type of vibe. If anybody knows who that is, that's now one of the wide receivers for the Buffalo Bills. Just very bubbly vibes, very energetic, very wanting to be there. And I think that's something that goes unnoticed and untalked about when we talk about these players because you talk about their workouts, you talk about their interviews and things of that nature. But being personable, being coachable, the intangibles are something that as reporters, I think we have a better lens at because we interact with them on a more a basic occasion. So I think it's interesting to think how these guys' personalities could play into what their role might be on the team or how they just mesh and gel with the guys on the roster.
We've talked about this a few different times, Ethan. These aren't just names on a contract, right? These are people. They have personalities. You have to find the right blend on a basketball team. This isn't tennis. This isn't golf. This is a team sport. You have to win with the right people. You have to sign the right people, and that brings us to free agency as well. When it comes to trying to acquire somebody in free agency, it can be difficult because you don't know how that guy is going to look in your system, right? You don't know how that guy is going to blend into your locker room. You can sit there and you can have a bunch of conversations with former teammates. You can have a bunch of conversations with other coaches and gather as much intel as you possibly can. But until you get them in your building, in your system, around your players, there's no guarantee that they're going to be the proper fit. There's no guarantee that the chemistry is going to be right. There's no guarantee that their personality is going to blend into the fabric of the team that is already pretty established. So when it comes to free agency, it can be a delicate thing and a lot goes into it. Figuring out who these guys are, what makes them tick, how coachable they are, all those different things. And that's part of the reason why the Cavs were so comfortable with Max Strus and George Niang last year and Ty Jerome, because of the working relationships and the previous relationships that those guys had with either coaches on the staff, members of the front office, or players in that locker room. And that's something to consider here when it comes to free agency for the Cavs this offseason.
And speaking of being able to win a locker room and also be able to mesh in a locker room, JB Bickerstaff has a new job. JB Bickerstaff is moving over to the Detroit Pistons as their next head coach. And Chris, I think it's a really good fit because we've talked about at length how JB kind of reinvigorated this culture in the Cleveland Cavaliers, and he's going to go over there to a team that was the bottom of the NBA and be able to do the same thing. And also, Cade Cunningham is said to be signing another lengthy contract with the Detroit Pistons, which gives him a player that he can work with and build around. And I just think as coachable and as personable of a guy that not only Kate Cunningham was, but also J.D. Bickerstaff, I feel like it's just going to be a really good match and what he's going to be able to do over there. What are your thoughts?
I think it's the right fit for Detroit, and I think it's the right fit for JB. And you always hate to put any coach in a box and say, like, this is the coach that they are for this situation, right? But I think some evidence is there that the situation that the Pistons are in, a rebuilding team, that's the right fit for JB Bickerstaff. There are questions about his ability to build confidence with star players. There are questions about whether players have confidence in his systems offensively and defensively and what kind of tactician he is. So if you're an organization that is trying to go from good to great, I don't know that he would be the first call that you would make. I don't know that he has shown to be that kind of playoff tactician, that kind of in-game manager, that kind of in-game adjuster, that kind of chess master. But if you're a team that's looking to go from bad to good, he's the right guy. He has shown to be that guy. Houston, Memphis, Cleveland. He has found a way to get all of those teams to buy into a certain style, to play really, really hard, and in some cases overachieve based on the talent that he has on those rosters. So I do think it's a really, really good fit. And I think you bring up a good point, Ethan. This idea that there's some guarantee that rebuilds work in the NBA is foolish, because not every rebuild is going to work. Like, you can sit there and you can have a bunch of draft picks and you can acquire talent over and over and over again, but you could be stuck on the treadmill to nowhere for 10 years, 15 years. So there was no guarantee that someone else was going to be able to come in, pick up the pieces of the John Beilein disaster, and turn the Cavs into who they are right now. This is a team that is one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. This is a team that is going to go into the season with aspirations of taking the next step, going to the conference finals, going to the NBA finals, back-to-back playoff appearances, an Eastern Conference semifinals berth without LeBron James for the first time in 30 years, a team that got better and advanced further every single year that JB was here. You cannot just assume that somebody else was going to do that. You can't just take that level of success, not a championship, but still some success. You can't take that level of success for granted. You have to credit JB Bickerstaff for doing that. And there's enough evidence in his background that going to Detroit, he could potentially do the same thing for the Pistons. He might get them to play hard. He might get them to buy in on defense. He might bring Isaac Okoro with him. Who knows? He's a restricted free agent. Detroit has a whole bunch of money to spend this offseason, and they don't have a player like Isaac Okoro. My sources say that is the team that the Cavs are most worried about. That is the team that people around the NBA feel like if there's going to be, a significant financial offer out there for Isaac, it's going to come from Detroit, and it's going to come from JB Bickerstaff's team, so that he can bring somebody in there to set the tone on defense. He can bring somebody in there that's tough, competitive, and help him set the culture that he wants to set there. JB is a culture setter. That's what he's done his entire career. And I do not put it past him to be able to pick up the pieces in Detroit and turn it back to a respectable franchise the same way that he did in Cleveland.
And we also know that Isaac Okoro wants more playing time. He wants more availability. He wants more active role in his career. Like, he envisions himself as one of the better guards, one of the better threes in this league. And I understand that right now in his role, he's not seeing the same opportunities as he did, especially when we talk about when he first got into the NBA. He was a guy that was kind of thrown into the fire and given a whole lot of different roles and said, hey, figure it out. This team is going to go as you go, along with Darius Garland, and we got to see where we can go from there. And then you add in different pieces like Max Strus and Donovan Mitchell, and the opportunities that we've talked about for not only Darius Garland, but also for Isaac Okoro have diminished. And like we've talked about with Darius Garland, and we're going to get to that shortly, but Isaac wants the opportunity to do what he came into the league doing, playing and getting opportunities. And I feel like if he were to go, and that's the question that a lot of Cavs fans I've been seeing over the internet verse or whatever you want to call it, is they're like, why would you go to Detroit? Why would you want to go to Detroit? Because you might get a better opportunity to play. You might get more money. You might get a whole lot of things that the Cavs can't offer you at this very moment. But you would be sacrificing going to a team that you don't know if they're fighting for a play-in seed or if they're going to be, again, still at the bottom of the league. But that's the same. We've talked about the Eastern Conference a little bit, and it feels like almost every team is getting better, Chris. The New York Knicks got substantially better going to get Mikal Bridges and re-signing OG Anunoby. The Orlando Magic got better today, getting Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And then you also think about Philadelphia, who are the front runners to get Paul George. Those are teams that, one, have already been in contention with the Cavs this past season, but with getting the guys that they are, it feels like they're even raising their standards even higher. Do you feel like the Cavs are now being pressured to make a move or make moves, or do you think that they're ready to just run it back with the guys that they have on this roster?
Every team is in a different situation. They're in a different situation based on their timeline. They're in a different situation, Ethan, based on their salary cap. They're in a different situation based on their roster construction. All those teams that you mentioned had the resources and the assets to get better, right? You have to have the means, you have to have an avenue to improve that kind of way. And, not everybody's going to be in that same kind of situation. The 76ers had a whole bunch of cap space. So, of course, they're going to be involved in Paul George in a way that the Cavs can't be. The Orlando Magic had a whole bunch of cap space. So, of course, they're going to go out and they're going to target, whoever it was going to be, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Paul George, get a meeting with him. There were rumblings about the potential of Klay Thompson. Isaiah Hartenstein is somebody that has been mentioned as a possible Orlando Magic player. And then the New York Knicks have oodles of draft picks into the future that they can throw at different teams when it comes to, a potential blockbuster trade for Mikal Bridges. The Cavs don't have any of those things. They don't have the draft capital to make the Bridges move. They don't have the cap space to go out and sign Paul George or some of these other free agents. Like, forget Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. He was never on the Cavs' radar. They could never afford him. The big move that the Cavs made happened a couple of summers ago when they gave up a whole bunch of their assets and resources for Donovan Mitchell. And a majority of what the Cavs are going to do this offseason, at least what they're going to prioritize this offseason, Ethan, it's their own guys. Donovan Mitchell, get him to sign a long-term extension. Evan Mobley, give him the rookie scale max extension that the Cavs are hopeful that he's going to sign. Figure out what's going to happen when it comes to Isaac Okoro, who's a restricted free agent. Are the Cavs going to match an offer that comes to him? Is he going to play on the qualifying offer? Are they willing to go to $15 to $18 million, that annual range when it comes to his salary? Can they bring him back on the mid-level exception, something around that price range, not the mid-level exception itself, but something around that price range between, 10 to 12 or 12 to 14, as opposed to 15 to 18 or 18 to 20. Those are the decisions. Jared Allen, he's eligible for a contract extension. Those are the decisions and the moves that are going to take priority for the Cavs, given their current setup and given their salary cap situation. What they have to offer in some ways is dictated by what happens with Isaac Okoro, but what they have to offer technically is the full mid-level exception, which is around $13 million annually. Have you taken a look at the free agents that are out there? Just generally speaking, it's not a strong class to begin with. And then when you start chopping off the names at the top of those lists, because you know that the Cavs cannot realistically sign any of those guys for the mid-level exception, it starts to get a little bit dicey. You're talking about Buddy Hield, you're talking about Gary Trent Jr., you're talking about Malik Beasley, you're talking about Luke Kennard, Nicola Batum, and you can make a case for a lot of those guys, and you can sit there and you can say that some of those guys would help. They would add depth. Maybe in some cases you would consider them an upgrade, right? But every decision that the Cavs make here moving forward is going to affect their future, is going to affect other moves that they can potentially make. And just in the situation that they are, given their salary cap situation and what is going to expand when it comes to their own salary cap into the future, and then the first apron and the luxury tax, they're going to be a tax team in a couple of years, if not next year. They're going to be a first apron team, if not next year, in a couple of years. So it's is it worth it, not to get all nerdy and cappy and stuff like that, but is it worth it to start the luxury tax repeater clock this year before all of those contracts kick in for Kelly Oubre Jr.? Is it worth it? Because the contract that he signs, essentially double it. based on going into the tax, based on starting the repeater clock, right? So is it worth it to do that for Kelly Oubre Jr. or Derrick Jones Jr. or Sadiq Bey or Nicola Batum or Doug McDermott, like that caliber player? That's a question that I think the Cavs are seriously asking themselves. And look, some guys, they might say, yes, that guy is worth it. Yes, that guy can enhance our roster. Yes, that guy is better than what we already have on this roster. But when you start listing some of those names compared to guys that are already on the Cavs roster, it doesn't mean that the Cavs believe that their roster is perfect. It doesn't mean that the Cavs believe that there are no tweaks that need to happen. But it's all about, are you getting the value from those guys that you would potentially sign? And is it worth it given all of the kind of salary cap stipulations that any organization at this point has to navigate, even more so now? Look at some of the moves made by other teams and how much they're talking about the new CBA and stuff like that.
Yeah, money always talks, Chris. That is a conversation that is not needed because we understand how much money influences everything, especially like you said with these new aprons and CBA and all those things coming into play sooner rather than later, which is kind of scary when you think about the contracts that are pending and what might happen in the next coming years because of how
Yeah.
everything is adjusting on the fly, it seems like, and how the NBA price is continuing to rise. But
I mean,
speaking of,
Buddy Hield is a name that is available in free agency. He was somebody who kind of like, so the 76ers traded for him at the deadline, and then he kind of fell out of the rotation. You going to give him the mid-level exception? I mean, maybe you feel like the movement that he brings, the gravity that he brings, the shooting prowess that he brings, despite some of the defensive issues, maybe you believe that that's going to be worth it, right? But is Luke Kennard better than Sam Merrill? Like, is he that much better than Sam Merrill to step into some of the tax-related stuff that you would have to step into? Maybe the first apron stuff that you would have to step into? Those are the questions that you have to ask. It's not as simple as saying, well, sign X player because he's a good player and he would make the Cavs better and he's better than what they have. Like, he's got to be significantly better, I would think, that it wouldn't be viewed as a lateral move or just an insurance move or a depth move or something along those lines. And that doesn't mean that the Cavs are not going to sign anybody. All I'm saying is, well, I'm trying to lay out the whole scenario and kind of what they're thinking going into this free agency process. And I'm saying that they're trying to be cognizant of who they're willing to spend on given this particular marketplace. Najee Marshall is a guy who reportedly agreed to a deal with the Dallas Mavericks. He was on the Cavs' radar. He would have made sense, but he went to Dallas instead. So take him off the list. They're just going to be really, really cognizant and judicious with how they spend this particular offseason with these free agents that are available and realistically attainable. Let's put it that way.
and you also think about the fact that this is a Cavs team that has basically religiously said that they want to keep the core four intact. They've been saying that from the end of season press conference with Kobe Altman to recently with the general manager and all of those things with Mike Yancey. Like, you think about those things. And then you also look at the moves that we're talking about that other teams have already made. Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. We've heard that rumor of those two having like Darius Garland's representation saying if Donovan Mitchell signs that he's going to want out, yada, yada, yada. All of those things. But if you look at the teams that have already signed players or traded for players that would have made sense for Darius Garland. You look at the New Orleans Pelicans with DeJounte Murray, and you look at San Antonio Spurs with Chris Paul, and then you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves with Mike Conley. Like, those are teams that we originally had thought that the Cavs could have seen themselves trading or signing away from to give Darius away and then getting something back in return that would have been better for them in the long run, depending on what Darius wanted. But with those trades and those signs happening, it feels less and less likely that the Cavs are going to depart from the Darius Garland experience. And more so, it could look more like Jared Allen is the biggest trade target for the Cavs, or they just keep the core four intact. Where do you think it is lying at the moment, Chris? And what do you think is the most logical or plausible thing for the Cavs to do during this free agent market and also just during this off season?
Every conversation that they've had to this point, Ethan, from what I can gather, is how do we enhance this roster around the core four? When they were having meetings with Kenny Atkinson and James Borrego and Mike Inori, it was, what is your plan to get the most out of Jared Allen and Evan Mobley together? What is your plan for Evan Mobley's development and his evolution? What do you see when it comes to Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell? How can you get the most out of this core four? The Cavs are looking at this as, we like our roster. This is a really talented roster. We went to the Eastern Conference semifinals. How can we get better by avoiding a drastic shakeup? Like, I'm told that they've had, general conversations and trade discussions around Isaac Okoro, George Niang, and Dean Wade. That's what they've been exploring, those kinds of trade scenarios. Maybe they'd consider trading Karis LeVert if they get the right deal back in return. And look, they don't have LeBron on this team. You know what I mean? They don't have Victor Wembanyama on this team. So if they get some kind of package for either Darius Garland or Jared Allen that blows them away, that they can't possibly say no to, a package that, Brooklyn didn't want to trade Mikal Bridges. Brooklyn had turned down a bunch of different offers for Bridges in the past. But New York blew them away. There was no way that any human being could have turned down that for Mikal Bridges, right? So if the Cavs get that kind of offer, a Godfather offer for Darius or Jared Allen, of course they'll listen. Of course they'll consider it. But everything that I'm hearing is that the team has been exploring trade scenarios involving other players on the roster, not the core four, because it's about how do we enhance this roster around those guys? How do we find pieces that fit around those guys? How do we find pieces that are going to bring out the best in Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland together, that fit best with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley? That has been the primary conversation internally for the Cavs, from what I gather. And I just don't know that they have an appetite to make that kind of significant shakeup when it comes to their roster, especially in this particular marketplace. Because I keep going back to this, Ethan, you can't determine, if you're the Cavs, you can't determine who is available to you. You can't just go into a store and say, yeah, I want X player to be available because it suits me, because those are the types of players that I want. The Cavs can't just go and say, hey, Phoenix, we need a player like Kevin Durant. Make him available. And make him available for the pieces that we have to realistically offer you. It doesn't work that way. So I just don't know who is out there that is realistically attainable for the Cavs in a potential Darius Garland or Jared Allen type move that they would say yes to. That's, to me, what it comes down to. Maybe they're going to get more offers as this summer continues to progress. Maybe some of those are going to be tempted. But at the end of the day, they have to say yes to whatever package it is that team is offering. And I just find it hard to believe that somebody is going to meet the Cavs' asking price for either one of those guys that they would be willing to say yes to.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Brooklyn Nets trade to New York for Mikal Bridges, and I know the Cavs would have been licking their chops looking at all those draft picks that were being offered, thinking, my goodness, we don't have any draft picks to give up or to get back. You know how much we could have done with all of those picks? But yeah, it's an interesting game that's being played, and like we had this conversation at the trade deadline, right? Like they didn't have
Mm,
a whole lot to offer. They didn't have a whole lot of pieces to give up. And everybody was like, well, they need to make a move. They need to do this.
right.
And they ended up staying with the same roster that they had and going to the Eastern Conference semifinals. And barring a ton of injuries to two of their most important pieces on the team, could have probably put up a better fight. Not going to say that they would have taken down Boston, but they could have put up a better fight against Boston. And I feel like it's going to be the same situation here where the Cavs could make a small move here or there, or they could end up just sitting down and not getting an offer back that they would have liked and saying, hey, well, we're going to run it back with who we have. Hope we're healthy. Hope we have the right guys. But I don't know, Chris. I just feel like we're going to get a lot of questions and a lot of Cavs fans saying, what are the Cavs doing if they don't make a
Sure.
move?
Sure. I think that's fair. I think it's valid. But let's go through it, right? So one of the names that is out there that is available in this trade marketplace is Brandon Ingram. Okay. I do think the Cavs have components that would entice New Orleans, especially Jared Allen. Not so much Darius Garland anymore because they have DeJounte Murray. So Jared Allen, is it worth giving up Jared Allen for Brandon Ingram to turn around and pay Brandon Ingram $40 to $50 million annually to make him one of your highest paid players?
I'd say no, especially because of what it seems like Sacramento's offering him, which it's no. I don't think he's that level of player anymore. But do I think
Mm-hmm.
he would be a fit for this team? I think it would because of what they're needing, what they're looking for. But I feel like you would be giving up more than you would get in return because you don't know how high his ceiling is anymore to this point.
So again, I don't know the appetite, but like this could potentially be a 3-team deal. Sacramento is dangling a combination of Harrison Barnes and Kevin Herter. Like if that meant giving up Jared Allen or Darius Garland, are you good with that level of value coming back in return? Again, in a 3-team type trade that would probably include other pieces. But if you're talking about those kinds of deals, either Jarrett or Darius would probably have to be the centerpiece. If you want to start looking a little bit lower, right, and then you get into Cam Johnson, you get into Dorian Finney-Smith, you get into DeAndre Hunter of the Atlanta Hawks, maybe Kyle Kuzma of the Washington Wizards. Like those guys, in some cases, those guys are logical fits for the Cavs, and they probably wouldn't cost either Darius or Jarrett being the centerpiece. In that case, you're probably more looking at Isaac Okoro, Dean Wade, maybe Karis LeVert, George Niang to match salary, some future draft capital tossed in there when it comes to second round picks, obviously. So I think if the Cavs are going to make external additions beyond free agency, I think they're going to set their sights to that next tier of player. I don't think Cam Johnson is on the tier as Brandon Ingram, right? Cam Johnson's not on the tier as Paul George, which is complete and utter pipe dream. But I'm just bringing up like players stylistically and from a talent perspective. Like that next tier of player, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Harrison Barnes on his own. Like I said, DeAndre Hunter. If Washington has an appetite for moving off of Kyle Kuzma, trying to think what other players I've heard mentioned around. Those are the main ones. Like the Cavs don't have enough, I don't think, for Lowry Markkinen. He's a different type of player. He's a different tier of player. Maybe Keldon Johnson from the San Antonio Spurs. That next tier of player, I think that's if the Cavs are going to set their sights on an external improvement via trade. I think that's where they turn.
I just pulled up Brandon Ingram's stats just to make sure my take on that was accurate, and I
Sure.
forgot that he's only 26 years old.
Yeah, he's still
Like
young. He's
he's
got an
still
old body
young,
though.
yeah, and he's got upside. But I mean the haircut that he be rocking sometimes be throwing me off. But yeah, and he had a down year, but I think you mentioned Harrison Barnes and Kevin Herter. I think Sam Merrill would throw a fit because he had to fight out with Kevin Herter for the Sacramento Kings position when he got cut over there, and I that's a whole that we're talking about background and personalities and clashing and stuff. That to me would be one of those situations. But I mean, I like some of the guys that you mentioned, like Kyle Kuzma. I feel like he's gotten written off a lot because of his stints with the Wizards, with the Los Angeles Lakers. Like, I just think the Cavs. I still am of the belief that the Cavs need a either backup small forward for Max Strus, or they need a
Mm-hmm.
true two-way wing that is able to compete at that level as a starting small forward to allow
Mm-hmm.
for Max to get more time as a shooting guard. Because I mean, we saw that, and we have talked about this. There are players in this league that can play bigger than they are. Max Strus is one of those guys because he's
Mm-hmm.
tenacious, he gets after it, all of those things. But at times during last season, it did feel like he was being out overpowered by some of the small forwards in the league. Some of the bigger smaller forwards, which doesn't give Max enough credit for what he was able to contain when it came to Jason Tatum in the playoffs and things of that nature. But I just think his primary position is shooting guard. And if you get him with Donovan Mitchell in that role, it makes life a whole lot easier because one, you don't have the difficulty of playing with a small backcourt like you do with Darius and Donovan, but you also get the sense that somebody would plug in as a bigger small forward than somebody
Mm-hmm.
like Isaac Okoro, who has been in that role for the majority of last season.
Okay, so who fits that? Let me give you a list, and you can tell me which guy in free agency you think qualifies.
Okay.
I have one that I like. I don't know what he would cost. Admittedly, he he just became quote unquote available today, as it was reported that the 76ers aren't going to hang on to him. Nicola Batum, Joe Ingles, Jetty Osman, Derrick Jones Jr., Sadiq Bey, Kelly Oubre Jr. That's about it.
So for the guys that you were
That's about
saying that the 76ers might get off of, are you talking about Tobias
it.
Harris?
No, Nicola Batum.
Okay, Batum. Well, Batum is a good option from that one just because of what he's able to bring on both ends of the ball. Let me pull up his stats so I can accurately give this really quickly. But yeah, he's had a long career. He's 35 years old. Um, he shot 39.9% from three on average of 3.1 3-point attempts per game. But he also averaged zero point 0.6 blocks per game, zero point 0.8 steals per game. Um, but yeah,
Like, we
I
know he
mean,
can defend. We
yeah,
know he
yeah,
can
yeah.
put his body in front of people. We know that he can play bigger than what he's listed.
And I think because he's a little bit older, he might be cheaper than a lot of the other guys that we've mentioned so
Probably.
far. Um, but I think because of the lack of, I don't want to say lack of playing time because he still averaged 26 minutes a game, but like he wasn't a guy that you know that the 76ers turned to. So who,
Doesn't have to be.
right? But if you're, I think I'm thinking of guys that could step into that starter role for the Cavs for as a small forward if needed. Like if somebody gets hurt and Max Strus has to
Right.
slide into the two, and can they start and be
So
productive?
I gave you the list. I
Right.
gave you the list of available small forwards that are realistically attainable for the Cavs. How many of those are appealing to you?
I think like three. Can you list them again? I just want to write them
Sure.
down at the same time.
Nicola Batum, Joe Ingles, Jetty Osman, Derrick Jones Jr., who is longer, taller Isaac Okoro, Sadiq Bey, and Kelly Oubre Jr., who, by the way, was Plan B for the Cavs, I'm told, if they did not get Max Strus last year.
Yeah, I think of this list, Ingles is old. I mean, everybody in Cleveland loves Jetty Osman, but no. Um, I mean Kelly Oubre, and I know you Derrick Jones Jr. isn't like a star guy or anything of the sort, but I definitely think he would fit the mold. Well, actually, nah, he's 6'6". He's a little short. So I think of this
He's got
list,
long arms,
he
long
does.
gangly
He
arms. Yeah.
does. He's definitely got the wingspan. But of this list, I mean, I would just go with Kelly Oubre Jr. to be very honest with you. Of guys, and Sadiq Bey because he just became more available. But
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, I
I guess
think
the point that I'm making is like that's the caliber of player
right.
that we're talking about for the Cavs. That is currently available and probably realistically attainable to them based on what they can offer, the mid-level exception. And now here's the thing, the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, there are a handful of teams that have that to offer too. So we're talking about a competitive market, and many teams are going to be looking for wings because it's a commodity in today's NBA, and it's a very, very valuable archetype. Um, so that's the caliber of player we're talking about in free agency. And I just don't see a significant upgrade there. If you squint hard enough, sure, I think you can probably see it. Maybe, possibly. Um, but is that a significant upgrade over what they already have? And then if you start going with some of these other positions too, you run into the same situation, Ethan. You really do. Like the position group where it might be like the most appealing for the Cavs based on this free agency class is also one that's kind of crowded for the Cavs to begin with. It's the shooting guard spot because they do have Karis LeVert on this roster. Donovan Mitchell is going to play a whole bunch. Sam Merrill is somebody who is probably a better fit for this Kenny Atkinson type style that's about run and gun, pace and space, shoot a bunch of threes, and play at a fast pace. But Gary Trent Jr. is intriguing, right? Malik Beasley, intriguing. Gary Harris, Buddy Hield. But again, it comes down to those are probably the best options in terms of a position group. But what kind of value are you going to get from them if they're not going to play a significant role on this particular team based on its current roster setup? And everything's a meritocracy. Everything is about earning minutes. And how Kenny Atkinson sees one player may be different than how JB Bickerstaff saw a player in the past. But what role is waiting here that is significant for Gary Trent Jr.? Same thing when it comes to Malik Beasley. Same thing when it comes to Buddy Hield. Same thing when it comes to potentially, Gary Harris. I think you can make a case for all of those guys and say, hey, those would be good additions. Those are playable guys. Maybe they can play some minutes at the three in a small ball lineup because of the positions that they've guarded in the past, because of the style of player that they are.
Chris, you're gonna get
So
yelled at. You're gonna get yelled at because all of those guys are 6'5" and below. So the fans are gonna say if they're not 6'5", we can't.
that's what I'm saying. I mean, like, there's a reason why they're available in free agency. There are flaws attached to them, just like there are positives that you can make a case for. And then you can go to power forward, right? And you can say, hey, the Cavs need to upgrade on George Niang. They need to upgrade on Dean Wade. George is an 82 game player, not a 16 game player. All right. So let's go to the free agents at power forward, the ones that are probably in the price range of the Cavs. Kyle Anderson can't shoot, doesn't work on this team. Forget him. Even though the Cavs a couple of years ago, when they were in a different kind of situation, were interested in him. Jalen Smith from the Indiana Pacers. It seems like Cavs Twitter is united on this idea that Jalen Smith would be a good pickup, and the Cavs worked him out ahead of the draft in 2020, and they liked him going into that draft. But is he some like 25 to 30 minute a night player? Is he some guy that is significantly better than George Niang? And I totally understand that Niang did not set the bar very high based on the way that he played last year for the Cavs. But how much better is Jalen Smith than Niang, than Dean Wade? And is it worth it to go into the tax for that guy? You know, a guy who has never had a significant role throughout the course of his career, despite being a top 10 pick in the past. The idea of him is really, really sound. He's a young player. There's upside there. He can space the floor. He can shoot. He can block some shots. But, what's he going to get? 16 to 20 minutes a night?
And we've already talked about how efficiency goes down for guys when they get less opportunities, less minutes, get into a rhythm, because most of these guys are rhythm shooters. They're not just I can get in and make one and be on a flow. No, you got to take a couple, get into your flow and things of that nature. But it's funny, Chris, because we're at the point where we're talking about a team like the Cavs who is turning into a run and gun 3-point team, and it felt like this team was not like that at all at the beginning of last season. And then Evan Mobley and Darius Garland get hurt. And J.U. Bickerstaff, who was not known to making adjustments and making offensive sets and helping schemes get better and all these other things, said, hey, Sam Merrill, Max Strus, Donovan Mitchell, shoot more threes. Let's up from 31 to 40 attempts a game. What a thought. And we get a team that begins shooting around 40 attempts from beyond the arc and not only winning, but blowing teams out or letting teams back into the game and seeing how that goes. But it's crazy that J.B. Bickerstaff got so much hate for not being able to adjust or all those things, but created this idea that if they were able to do this, that they would have more success. Changing the thought of how Evan Mobley's development needed to be this last season. Changing how the Cavs saw themselves going into the offseason, even without J.B. Bickerstaff as their coach. We've been talking about it the entire time. The Cavs have begun creating an offense that is running gun, shoots threes, and is better when it's moving in space. Okay. Who originally came up with that idea? J.B. Bickerstaff. Yeah. And now we're like, well, okay, Kenny Atkinson can make do and potentially do better with that idea than J.B. Bickerstaff did. But it's just crazy to me how those things came to mind and those things have changed over time. And yet everybody that I've seen with the Detroit Pistons hire for JB has been like, this is a great hire. He won so many games with them over the last 3 years. He's taking them to the playoffs the last 3 years. I don't even know why they've let him go. And then you get the exact opposite from Cavs fans. Like, oh, thank God he's gone. We're just happy to move on. And now it's like, is Kobe Altman gone next?
That's what we're talking about, though, Ethan. Every team's in a different situation. Every season's staying on its own. You know what I mean? There's not necessarily a carryover. So for the Pistons, they're in a different situation entirely. I can understand why they would be excited about JB Bickerstaff. But here in Cleveland, it's about, competing for conference finals and finals. And when you've had a guy for more than 4 years, you see his flaws and you're more aware of those flaws and you're trying to figure out how to fix those flaws. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's why Cavs fans are looking at the situation with JB saying, good luck, Detroit, because they're in a different situation than the Pistons.
100%. And I'm not saying that it would have been better off or the Cavs would be in the same situation or in a better situation if they would have kept JB. I'm just saying how funny it is how the coin is always flipping and turning and there's different ideas on each side. But I think with everything that we've talked about today, with all the potential trades, all the potential free agent signings, I don't know. I think this Cavs team is really happy about where they are, especially with a new coach coming in with a guy who is known for player development and Kenny Atkinson, and trying to see if Evan Mobley, like we've been saying, can be Donovan Mitchell's
Mm-hmm.
running mate rather than going and getting a second star. So, Chris, do you think this team, as it is right now, can challenge Boston and New York and Philadelphia, who we think to be the three teams? And then we're even leaving off the Milwaukee Bucks, which is crazy to me. But like
Mm-hmm.
those four teams are the teams that we know that they'll be competing with if things go the way that they want later on into next year.
Yeah, I do. If Donovan Mitchell's here, if he's leading the way, if Kenny Atkinson becomes the right coach for the Cavs, certainly. This is a team that advanced to the Eastern Conference semifinals this past year. This is a team that has upside to grow together. I expect Darius Garland to be better if he comes back for the Cavs. He's not dealing with the same stuff that he dealt with last year. Um, the factors around his poor performance, some of those have changed. So I think there's going to be some internal growth from this team. I think they're going to have a level of belief in Kenny Atkinson and a level of confidence in Kenny Atkinson that they just didn't collectively have in JB. And I think that's going to matter too. I'm not going to sit here and say that Philadelphia hasn't gotten better, especially if they get Paul George. Are you kidding me? Like, that's a team that you're going to have to deal with. Same thing when it comes to the New York Knicks, now that they got Mikal Bridges. And we all know that Milwaukee's not just going to sit on their hands. And Orlando, really, really good move to get KCP. That backcourt's going to be hell to deal with for any team, especially in a 7-game series. That size, that length, that athleticism, the tenacity of Jalen Suggs and KCP. But they've got offensive issues too. We can't ignore those things. So, I mean, there is no Golden State of the dynasty between 2014 and 2018 looming out there. I think every single one of these rosters that you point to, whether it's in the West or the East, has flaws, has concerns attached to it. The Cavs included. There's no doubt about it. I don't think they're on the level of Boston. I don't think anybody else on the Eastern Conference um, hierarchy is. But like, if Philadelphia gets Paul George, that puts them a lot closer. If it comes together the way that everybody expects it to, and if New York doesn't lose too much here in free agency, Isaiah Hartenstein being one of those guys, then I think they can certainly compete with the Celtics just based on the personnel. But I still think Boston's on a tier of its own, and they've earned that, and they deserve that. I think with Porzingis, they're a cheat code. And then it's the next tier of teams, and I think the Cavs are pretty much lumped in there. And they, like I said, they have money to spend in free agency if they want to go that direction, the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. I think they're going to be a better team because I think they're going to be better coached, and I think they're going to believe in this coach in a different kind of way. And I do think that there is internal improvement that's going to happen from specifically Evan Mobley and Darius Garland that can make this team better, more formidable, and tougher to deal with in a 7-game series. It doesn't mean that this roster isn't flawed, and it doesn't mean that there aren't holes that could be patched, and it doesn't mean that there aren't positions or spots within the rotation that can't be improved. I just don't see those out there right now for them in free agency that's going to make me significantly feel better about their chances of competing with Boston and some of those other teams that you mentioned. Now, if they go out and they start to reconfigure the roster and they get somebody like Cam Johnson, like Kyle Kuzma, like Dorian Finney-Smith, DeAndre Hunter, that type of player who fits really, really well, who probably improves depending on the guy who it would be, the 6, 7, 8 man in the rotation, then I'd probably feel a little bit better about their chances with those other teams. But there wasn't anything that they were going to be able to do, Ethan, this offseason, based on the situation that they're in, to all of a sudden catch Boston. You know what I mean? There is no magical bullet out there for them. Teams around them are going to continue to get better because they have the opportunities to get better, because they have the resources to get better, because they have the means to get better. But that doesn't mean that the Cavs are a bad team. And I think there are reasons to believe that they can be better in a playoff environment based on those factors that I laid out there.
And I think the biggest thing to understand, especially with all the trades and all the free agent moves that are happening, especially for other teams, is the fact that this is all on paper. None of these teams that are making moves have officially played together. And we already understand that even if you move one chess piece, it can change the entire game. And I think that the hype around teams like the Los Angeles Clippers, who had Paul George, James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, that didn't pan out. So you think about teams that are making moves with star guys, that are adding guys that could potentially make a difference on their teams. You got to wait and see. Because the one thing that the Cavs would have if they don't end up making a move this offseason is they know what they're dealing with the guys that they have. They know what they have. They know what they're capable of. And there's a chemistry that is different from playing with a team fully for one season than there is for the second season. Because you get to grow with each other. Like, it's an 82-game season, Chris, and you know this better than anybody else. Like, traveling, being with each other, all of those things makes a different kind of level of camaraderie and team chemistry. And the only team that I think that is making moves right now that could potentially say that they're going to be okay, even though they went and made a major change, would be the New York Knicks, because they got the Nova boys. And they have guys that have played together since they were in college. So that's a different conversation. But technically, it's still on paper. We got to see them play together with the other rotational pieces around them.
I mean, did people think that the Cavs were going to get LeBron? I mean,
yes,
did people think they were going to get Paul?
They did, Chris. They did.
They were going to get Paul George?
If they would have made moves, like, I think everybody was expecting the big explosion. They were like, all right, Jared Allen's out of here, Darius Garland's out of here, because of all the reports that were going on early on. But nobody wanted to listen to the president of basketball operations who was saying we don't want to break up the core four. And I think it's just like reality setting in for a lot of the reporters that were reporting big things earlier on, and all of the fans that are like, okay, we might just have to see what this team is capable of with who we have on the roster.
And we've talked about it so many times on this podcast, Ethan. So much of this comes down to value. What value are you getting back in return from these guys? And if the Cavs were to consider it equal value or something that makes them better moving forward, both in the short term and long term, they could still trade Darius Garland, sure. They could still trade Jared Allen, sure. But I just keep going back to this current marketplace in the NBA. And I just don't see that guy out there that's going to make such a drastic difference for them that they would be willing to do that.
All right, Chris, we done got into the nitty gritty. We done got into everything possible around this trade cycle, around this free agency. So, with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. This is where, if anything goes down throughout free agency that relates to the Cavs at all, you'll get a text directly to your phone from either me or Chris. So, to get this information, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy. But we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.